Welcome to Funny Answers to Happy Questions. This is a stand-up comedy lecture show, so it's for those of you who like TED Talks but wish that they had jokes, were performed at a desk, and were also 3 times as long. My name is Ryan Wingfield. I am your host. I am also a stand-up comedian, which, for the record, is a pretty sweet gig. I get to travel around the world. I only work 1 hour a night. I get to drink on the job for free. And best of all, I get to make people laugh, which is almost a weird superpower when you think about it. I can make people happy using the sound of my voice. It's like being Barry White if he was stuck in the friend zone. And I do realize that saying my job is to make people happy is a weird way to describe my profession. It's suspiciously vague when you put it like that. It sounds like something a con man would say, or maybe a mobster. And what do? Let's just say I make people happy. Yeah, that's it. Don't worry about how. No, let me worry about how. You just worry about being happy, capiche? But today I'm going to do more than just make you happy. Today I'm going to lead you on a comedic deep dive into the science of happiness, and I'm going to try and answer every question you have ever thought to ask about happiness, and many that have probably never even crossed your mind. From what happiness is, to its benefits and its limitations. For example, how much money do you need to be happy? Spoiler alert, probably more than you make. How much sex do you need to be happy? Not as much as you think, but still probably more than you're getting. What's the happiest number of kids, the happiest pet, the happiest religion, and perhaps most importantly, what can you do to make yourself happy? Or at least happier? Essentially, instead of just giving you a proverbial happiness fish like most comedians do, I'm also going to be teaching you how to fish, while at the same time giving an anatomy lesson on what makes a fish a fish. Now, before we get too far into this, I do want to acknowledge how weird it is for you to learn about happiness from a comedian. I mean, even though it is our job to make people happy, comedians are not exactly known for being happy ourselves. Trust me, I know hundreds of comedians. Probably all but 2 are deeply disturbed individuals. Thankfully, one of the 2 who isn't is me. Yeah, the other one is a guy named Kermit. No, not that Kermit. That one. Yeah, Kermit Apio. Very funny comedian. Very happy comedian, too. He's really found his rainbow connection. The truth is, though, most comedians, like most people for that matter, are mostly happy most of the time. At its core, comedy is all about finding the bright side in a bad situation. There's even a famous saying that comedy equals tragedy plus time. Although, to be fair, that math doesn't always add up. I mean, if it did, mathematically speaking, the bubonic plague would be hilarious. On a personal level, it really does work, though, which is why nothing truly bad can ever happen to a comedian. It just gives us more material to work with. I mean, I started losing my hair when I was in my 20s, but then I gained 20 new minutes of bald jokes. I know another guy who lost his toe to diabetes, turned it into his own Netflix special. Yeah, lucky guy. The point being that all comedians use our job to a certain degree in our own personal pursuit of happiness. Even comedians who are already happy to begin with, like myself. And this brings us to the most common question people ask me when I try to talk to them about happiness. Why do you want to be happy? Yeah, it's a question that really challenges the idea that there are no stupid questions. I mean, come on. Why do I want to be happy? Well, kind of for the same reason that I don't want to feel pain. Yeah, that answer being, it is preferable to the alternative. Come on, happiness doesn't even seem like a question. It's the answer you give to why you do anything you do. Yeah, why do I dress up like a woman and play a round of golf in high heels? Well, because it makes me happy. You know, that or I lost a bet. To many people, happiness is the whole point of life. It's not everything. But I would argue a life, even a good life, without happiness is a bit of a missed opportunity. It's like eating a gourmet meal when you have a head cold and you can't taste any of the food, or having sex without ever having an orgasm. You know, what a lot of women would probably call sex. Interesting side note, sex without an orgasm, the ending to every British porn. I'm kidding, I am kidding. I wouldn't know. I've never watched a porn to the end. Now, that isn't to say there aren't some legitimate criticisms about focusing too much on trying to be happy. After all, a little sadness and discomfort can sometimes be a good thing. It can motivate you to improve your life. Even trauma can be a source of inspiration for an artist, a musician, or a stand-up comedian. However, most of the common criticisms you hear about happiness don't really hold up to scrutiny. The one I hear the most is people say there's no point in trying to be happy because happiness is a fleeting emotion that doesn't last very long. And that's somewhat true. I mean, every fairy tale you ever read when you were a kid ended with the phrase, "and they lived happily ever after." Yeah, and anyone who's been married can tell you, no, they did not. No, they lived happily ever for a week, probably, and then they got into a huge fight when Prince Charming left his underwear on the floor. Let's get this out of the way. No one is going to be happy all the time, forever, unless that person is a dog. Yeah, dogs are the only animal that can be happy all the time, probably because they can lick their own crotch. But just because you can't be happy all the time doesn't mean you shouldn't try and be happy more often. That's like saying there's no point in taking a shower because eventually you will start to smell again. That is a terrible way to live your life, not just for yourself, but for anyone who has to be around you. Speaking of other people, another common complaint I hear is people feel guilty about being happy when they know there are other people who are sad or otherwise miserable. This is especially true if you were, like myself, raised Catholic. Yes, we have something called Catholic guilt, which basically says if something makes you happy, well, you should feel bad about doing it. But it doesn't make sense to withhold your happiness on the grounds that other people aren't experiencing it. Happiness isn't some finite resource. It's not something we have to ration. Okay, only 3 smiles today. Don't waste them looking at a cute baby. No. Happiness grows and spreads with everyone it touches. Studies have shown happy and sad people influence the moods of others around them and spread their emotions almost like a disease. So if you really care about other people, don't be unhappy because that is making them worse. And even if you take the emotional aspects out of being happy, there are still lots of benefits to living a happy life. Among the best is just how long of a life that is. Studies show the happiest people on average will live 10 to 20 years longer than people who are always grumpy or otherwise in a bad mood. Isn't that amazing? That's why every time I meet a jerk, I just think to myself, well, at least he'll be dead soon. Yeah, see, and that makes me happier and then I live longer. You see how that works? It's like emotional judo. I'm using their bitchy attitude against them. And that's just the start of the benefits to a happy life. Happy people are also in better shape and are more physically fit. They don't get sick as often, and when they do, they recover faster. They're more successful in their chosen careers. They make more money. They have more friends, more successful marriages. They even have a higher pain tolerance and a higher libido, meaning they have more sex. They're practically superhuman, all powered by a positive attitude. Now, admittedly, there is a bit of a chicken and the egg dilemma when it comes to all of those benefits. I mean, it could be true that happy people live longer, healthier, more successful lives. Or maybe it's just that people who live long lives where they rarely get sick, who don't feel a lot of pain, who have a lot of success, a lot of money, a lot of friends, and a lot of sex are just naturally going to be happy because their lives are freaking awesome. Yeah. And you know what? Fair point. But as you'll find out, there's a lot of evidence that having a happy and healthy, successful, meaningful life is a two-way street. Each would seem to benefit the other. And to understand why, we have to ask another seemingly obvious question. What is happiness? Now this one can get a little bit more tricky. You could ask 1,000 people to define happiness. You get 1,000 different answers. For example, Charles Schulz, the creator of Peanuts, famously said, happiness is a warm puppy. But then the Beatles came along and sang, happiness is a warm gun. Ooh, two very similar yet very different answers. I mean, unless gun was the name of their puppy. From what we can tell, the earliest definitions of happiness had a lot more to do with luck. It seems that early civilizations believed happiness was essentially a blessing of the gods, and to suggest otherwise was blasphemous. In fact, one of the first Greek philosophers to suggest humans could impact their own happiness was Socrates. And his idea was so controversial, he was accused of corrupting the minds of the youth and was sentenced to death. What? Yeah, thus the pursuit of happiness got off to a bit of a rough start. Today you can find thousands of definitions for happiness, but when it comes to science, the general consensus is that it is a byproduct of evolution, essentially a way of encouraging our species to survive. The idea being that when we do something that helps our species, it makes us happy and encourages us to do those things again. So things like eating food, having sex, securing a safe place to live. Those are all things that help our species survive. Coincidentally, those are also things that bring us either short-term pleasure and or long-term happiness. Now, your body accomplishes this with a bunch of chemicals in your brains called neurotransmitters. There are literally thousands of types of them, but for our purposes, they can be grouped into two categories. Those that help you relax and those that make you stressed. The former includes things like serotonin and dopamine, two chemicals that are associated with feelings of happiness. The latter category includes adrenaline and cortisol, things that are responsible for your fight or flight response. Basically, your brain is like a pharmacist handing out a bunch of uppers or downers depending on what you need to survive. You get a series of both throughout the day, but when your life becomes unbalanced, the stress hormones tend to build up, and that leads to feelings of anxiety, depression, and poor health. So from a purely biochemical perspective, happiness can be described as an increase of serotonin and dopamine and a reduction in stress hormones. But how easy is it to do that? Or to put it another way, how much of my happiness do I control? The general consensus is you control about 40% of your mood on a given day. So if you're having a bad day, that's at least a little bit on you. Yet ironically, very little can be blamed on the day itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can have a bad day. If you break your leg or you get fired from your job or you throw out your back trying a new move in the bedroom with your partner, it's going to be a bad day. Alternatively, if you get a promotion at work or you win the lottery or your partner tries out that move with you, it's going to be a good day. The thing is, most days don't have those big emotional highs or lows, and most things that happen to you don't have an impact on your emotions beyond a few minutes, if that. Even major life events like a divorce have only been shown to significantly impact your mood for about 3 months, although the alimony payments will last a lifetime. The reason circumstances don't affect us is that our brains get used to the new stimulation and we don't really notice it as much. It's kind of like living next to train tracks and getting used to the sound of the train going by, except that in this case, the train is your failed marriage. Because of this hedonic adaptation, the circumstances of your life are responsible for about 10% of your mood on a given day. That leaves the remaining 50% of your mood to be explained by genetics. So if you're the kind of person who likes to blame your parents for things, I have some good news. Yeah, it turns out some people are genetically predetermined to be jerks. And for the record, I'm not talking about political pundits. Most of them worked very hard to become the terrible people that they are today. Now, alternatively, there are some people who won the genetic lottery when it comes to happiness. But that begs the question, is there a happiness gene? Well, yes. In fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of genes that can impact your mood. Most people have a bit of a mixed bag, but about 20% of the population has a genetic advantage to being happy. These people have what we would call a high emotional intelligence that makes them extra sensitive to their emotions and the emotions of other people. As a result, these people tend to have better stress management, lower rates of depressions, and a higher satisfaction of life. So where are these people at? Or to put it another way, what is the happiest place on earth? According to the United Nations World Happiness Report, countries in Scandinavia and Northern Europe regularly rank among the happiest in the world, along with Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, some scientists have argued that these countries are so happy because they share a common genetic identity centered around the Netherlands. And I'm not just talking about the genes that make the women from those countries look like this. However, other scientists have pointed out that that idea is kind of racist. Oh no! I mean, when you think about it, there's a bit of a sordid history with people from Northern Europe claiming to be genetically superior. Yes, all of these countries share a similar genetic identity, but they also have a lot of wealth, strong social programs, a lack of military conflict, and several other factors that contribute to their happiness a whole lot more than their genetics. So it's not really a matter of genetic superiority as it is white privilege. It's the same way how people who are naturally smart or attractive tend to be happier, not because of the genes that gave them those traits, but because of the doors that those traits open to them, allowing them to have a better life. The reality is there is no one ethnic group of people who are happier than another. Studies show genetic factors such as race, gender, sexual orientation don't seem to have a major impact on your happiness, provided, of course, that you live in a place that doesn't discriminate against you based on any of those factors. Essentially, nowhere. For example, in the United States, women tend to be slightly happier than men when they're young, but as they get older, men become happier than women. As Carrie Fisher famously said, it's not that men age better than women, it's just that they're allowed to age. All you really need to understand about genetics is that it sets your happiness cruise control, or what's called your happiness set point. That is how happy you can expect to be on any given day. The circumstances of that day might make you happier or sadder, but eventually you will return to that same happiness level. The good news is you can permanently increase your happiness set point based on the choices that you make. This is the 40% of your happiness that is under your control and thus the most important when it comes to improving your happiness. So now we just need to ask, how do you choose to be happy? Personally, I hate it when people say you have to choose to be happy. I mean, I know they mean well, but they always come off a little pretentious and kind of dickish. Mostly because they say it after something terrible has happened to you. Hey man, it sucks you caught your wife cheating, but you can't choose what happens to you. You can only choose how you react to it. Okay, well, I'm going to choose to kick you in the crotch. Yeah, how are you going to choose to react to that? Look, there's nothing wrong with trying to look on the bright side of life. It's actually a very good thing. However, sometimes it is neither healthy nor socially appropriate. For example, if your grandfather dies, it's okay to be sad, maybe even a little angry. That's okay. That's natural. What's not okay is to automatically try and find the silver lining. Grandpa's dead. Ooh, I hope I'm in the will. Yeah, I'm gonna make so much money. All I gotta do now is get rid of Grandma. That bitch is going down. No. When I say choose happiness, I'm talking about making healthy life choices that will improve your quality of life. Remember, if happiness can be thought of as evolution's way of encouraging productive behavior, it would make sense that you can maximize your personal happiness by essentially living your best life. Be a good person, which in turn will make you happy, which in turn leads to good health and success, which in turn leads to more happiness, aka winning. Now we just have to ask, how do you live your best life? Obviously, there is no one solution, as you are all precious, unique snowflakes. However, thanks to thousands of studies on happiness, we can get some general ideas about what will likely make you happy. For example, we know that people tend to be happiest around 71 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. We know that vanilla, lavender, and freshly cut grass are the happiest smells. We know that fast, upbeat songs from the 1980s are the most likely to lift your mood, especially Queen's Don't Stop Me Now. We also know that people tend to be the happiest in their early 20s or their early 60s, two periods of life where they have a lot of new independence. In your 20s, it's the freedom of adulthood, being able to drink and having an active sex life. In your 60s, it's the freedom of retirement, financial security, and, thanks to Viagra, an active sex life, without the risk of getting pregnant. But when it comes to decisions that can actually improve your life, they can basically be grouped into three categories. Three broad life choices that have been scientifically proven to make you happier. Those are choose health, choose purpose, and choose relationships. Write that down. It will be on the test. Let's start with how do you choose health? This is the easiest one of the three to understand, and also the one that most people are doing wrong. Look at the person to your left, now look at the person to your right. Statistically speaking, the three of you weigh as much as four of you should. Hey! As I already mentioned, health and happiness are connected, with each supporting the other. Being happy can improve your health and longevity, but being healthy, in the form of getting plenty of rest, exercise, and a healthy diet, can improve your body chemistry, making it easier for you to put on a happy face. Basically, your body is the vehicle on the journey of your life, and it's not going to be a very fun road trip if the car keeps breaking down. Unfortunately, people are eating less healthy and exercising less, and we're not even getting enough sleep nowadays, meaning we are failing at doing nothing. In fact, if there was one thing I could recommend you do to improve your happiness, it would be get a good night's sleep. But how much sleep do you need to be happy? Well, that's complicated. The answer depends on your personal genetics, your diet, and what kind of day you've had, but the answer is probably more than you're getting. 100 years ago, the average person slept 9 hours every night. But to be fair, what else were they going to do? I mean, back then, sleep was the best thing to do when the sun went down. I mean, that and make more children. Yeah. I actually think that's why families were so big back then. Moms and dads just got bored when the sun went down. Since then, though, we've come up with television, the internet, various energy drinks, not to mention the late-night booty call, which is all the fun of having kids without actually having kids. Add that all together, and now the average person gets 6.7 hours of sleep. That's almost 25% less than we used to, and more than an hour less than the minimum recommended by most sleep experts. That extra hour of sleep is a big deal, too. According to a University of Michigan study, an extra hour of sleep will bring you the same amount of happiness as a $60,000 annual raise at your job. That's like getting $164 just to sleep in an extra hour. Although, to be fair, you should probably go to bed an hour earlier, which is a lot less fun. Our brains need that sleep, though, as a way of flushing stress hormones out of our systems. Sleep essentially gives our bodies a mental reset. And if that process gets cut short or interrupted, those stress hormones can build up, leading to anxiety, weakened immune system, and ironically, insomnia. Yeah, you can literally be too tired to go to sleep, leading to a downward spiral of caffeine addiction and crankiness. Studies show when our brains are tired, we lack a lot of our emotional filters, which is why little things feel like big things. It's kind of like having road rage, but when you're walking around the office. And the worst part is, you can't fix it with a single night worth of good sleep. The average person has such a sleep debt buildup that they would need to sleep 12 hours a night for an entire week just to get back to normal. So maybe on your next vacation, don't plan any activities before noon. Now, of course, you can also improve your regular sleep by doing things like limiting caffeine, avoiding food and drink late at night, and not doing any screen time immediately before bed. But for the record, I am bad at following all of that advice. Another thing that will help you sleep at night is to exercise during the day. But again, a lot of people are bad at that as well. Only about 1 in 6 Americans has a gym membership, and of those who do, 80% almost never use it. I have a brother who has one of those memberships, and he refers to it as his fat tax. Hey! The good news is, you don't necessarily need to go to a gym to get your grin on. But how much exercise should you get if you want to be happy? Well, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends that people get 30 to 60 minutes of exercise 3 to 5 days a week to see emotional benefits. And right now you're probably saying, well, if that's all I have to do, I guess I'll never be happy. And don't worry, you don't necessarily need to sweat to get your emotional grin on, although it does help. I mean, you've probably heard of a runner's high. It's a euphoric feeling that runners get when they exercise, and it's been compared to taking drugs. Now, I wouldn't know because I've never taken drugs, nor have I ever been a big fan of running. I mean, for that matter, I doubt very few people can compare the two. It's not like many competitive long-distance runners are also heroin addicts. Yeah, I'm literally chasing the dragon! The reason behind the runner's high comes from the endorphins and other natural painkillers that your body releases when you exercise. To maximize that, you need to get about 20 minutes of intense exercise so that your body goes into an anaerobic state. Now, if that sounds like too much, even a light run has been shown to increase your dopamine levels. And if that's too much, walking or yoga has also been shown to improve your mood, especially if you do it outside. Several studies have shown that spending time outdoors in nature, where you can see vegetation or bodies of water, will make you calmer, happier, and more creative, which is probably why Bob Ross paintings are so popular. I mean, he was really onto something with his happy little accidents. Some countries like Finland and Japan have even taken that idea a step further and have developed therapy trails where people can walk through nature as a way of improving their mood. I mean, I'm not sure it's better than going to a therapist, but it's probably healthier and a lot cheaper. Another benefit to being outdoors is sunlight. I mean, yes, too much sunlight will give you cancer, but avoiding it entirely almost guarantees you'll be in a bad mood. That's because our bodies use sunlight to produce serotonin and melatonin, which helps regulate our sleep and our mood. This is one of the reasons why depression rates increase in the winter when there's less sunlight. There's even a term for that called seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, a very appropriate acronym. Finally, when it comes to health and happiness, we have to ask, what is a happy diet? Food and happiness have a long history together, going back to ancient Roman feasts, which were admittedly just the prelude to drunken orgies. Today, one of the most popular menu items in the United States is literally called a happy meal, although to be fair, eating it isn't going to do a lot to improve your mood. What? And that's because most junk food is really a type of comfort food that immediately makes you feel safe and happy, mostly because it's calorie dense. High-calorie food was really appealing to people when we were a hunter-gatherer society and food was a little bit harder to come by. Because of this, junk food triggers the reward center of the brain and releases lots of dopamine. However, this release is so strong it can actually rewire your brain to create a type of food addiction. That's why sugar, caffeine, fatty foods, and alcohol all bring short-term pleasure but can lead to a long-term happiness loss. As an alcoholic friend once told me, drinking alcohol is kind of like borrowing happiness from tomorrow. And when you borrow, you have to pay back with interest. So if you really want to eat your way to happiness, you're better off eating a healthy diet, which might not taste as good, but will help your body produce more happy hormones, which will lead to a more enduring long-term happiness. Fish is a great example, as it has omega-3 fatty acids, which help prevent depression. One study even found countries where people don't eat a lot of fish, such as the United States, have up to 10 times the rate of depression as countries where fish is a major part of the diet. On a weird side note, ironically, eating fish might give you actual antidepressants, as studies show fish absorb a lot of antidepressants that people flush down the toilet. So in addition to omega-3 fatty acids, you're also getting like third-hand Prozac. Other sources of omega-3s include nuts such as walnuts, almonds, and Brazil nuts, which have all been shown to help boost your mood. Fruits and vegetables are also great, particularly beans, citrus, and dark green vegetables like spinach, which have B vitamins your body uses to create serotonin. One study even found that if you start eating 8 servings of vegetables a day, it will improve your mood as much as an unemployed person finding a job. And it will also limit the amount of time that you spend on the toilet. Now, weirdly, one of the best foods for your happiness might be no food at all. And that's because when your body is hungry, it releases a chemical called ghrelin that lets your brain know that you're hungry. In addition to that, ghrelin also acts as a natural antidepressant and has been shown to improve your mood. That being said, how many happy people do you know who are currently on a diet? I mean, we invented the word hangry for a reason. That's enough about health. Health equals happy, happy equals healthy. Got it? Good. Let's move on to something a little bit more challenging. How do you choose purpose? Essentially, we're asking, why are we here? Philosophers have only been dealing with this for a few thousand years, but I think we can figure out the answer in the next 10 minutes or so. Let's start by pointing out that having a happy life and a meaningful life are similar but different. For example, many US presidents would probably say that their term in office was meaningful, but based on how they aged, it probably wasn't very happy. No. The same is true for parents who are raising children, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Purpose and happiness is a delicate balancing act. A little purpose can improve your happiness a lot, but too much can have diminishing returns. Basically, none of us like feeling overwhelmed, but at the same time, we need something to do with our lives. That something can be a big thing or a little thing, long-term, short-term, but we all need some reason for getting out of bed in the morning. The French would call this a raison d'être. Maybe. I don't know because I don't really speak French. That's why I prefer the Japanese who use the term ikigai, which is a lot more fun to say. Finding and pursuing your own personal ikigai is actually a defining characteristic of the Japanese culture and has been credited with their long life. After all, if you can't find a reason to continue living, well, you probably won't. An ikigai can be something as complex as being a titan of industry or something as simple as taking care of a pet. But most fill 4 major categories. An ikigai is something the world needs, something that you are good at doing, something that you love to do, and ideally something that you can do for a living. Now, not every ikigai needs to fill all of those categories. For example, many hobbies such as volunteer work, gardening, music, sports, can fill a lot of those, although it is difficult to turn your passion into a profession. I mean, trust me, my comedy career didn't start paying the bills until I was almost 10 years into it. Thankfully, I have a very patient wife. I also did a bunch of other jobs, or side hustles, if you will. And speaking of jobs, for many people, their job is the closest thing they have to an ikigai. If not the job they have, then at least the job that they want. Which makes a lot of sense, as work satisfaction is attributed with up to 20 to 25% of overall life satisfaction. So, what is the happiest job? Here's a quick look at some of the happiest and least happiest jobs that regularly rank at the top and bottom of job satisfaction surveys. You'll notice a lot of the happiest jobs are not necessarily the easiest. Teachers, realtors, analysts, and managers all rank near the top, while easy, boring, repetitive jobs like security guard, salesperson, or customer service specialist are among the least happy. That being said, I personally think customer service specialist is among one of the hardest jobs there is. I mean, basically, your job is to get yelled at by people all day. You might as well set up a desk at the bottom of an outhouse. There's a good reason why easy jobs aren't very satisfying. Essentially, you need some challenge in your life. Setting goals and accomplishing them triggers your body's reward system and releases dopamine, making you happier. It's especially true if that goal is tangible, something you can see. When I'm not performing comedy, I'm a stay-at-home dad, and I make sure I do at least one visible chore every single day. Not only does that make me happier, but it also gives me something to point to when my wife asks what I've been doing all day. Well, that. When it comes to your job, a lot of business consultants would say that you need goals that are SMART. Here, an acronym standing for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Combine this with a job that challenges your skills, and you get the happiness creator that is known as flow. There are countless books on how to achieve flow for yourself or your company, but essentially it comes down to challenging your specific skill set without overwhelming you. Set realistic goals, obtain clear feedback, and see noticeable results. Now, if that doesn't sound like your job, at least know that you have a lot of company in your company, as not everyone loves what they do for a living. So how many people are happy with what they do for a living? Well, not a lot. It turns out there's a reason why people call work work. Oh no! Hence the saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Whatever it is that you do, you can probably categorize it in one of 3 ways. Either a job, a career, or a calling. The difference isn't so much what you do, but rather your attitude toward it. A job is something people just do for the money. The mantra of every stripper ever. These are the crap jobs people do just to pay the bills. The boring, repetitive tasks like a janitor or a food server. Both of which, by the way, I have done at some point in my life. That being said, I personally think everyone should have a job at some point in their life just to teach them respect for people who do that kind of work. About 25% of the population describes what they do as a job, and unsurprisingly, these are people who are the least happy with what they do. About half of the population would describe what they do as a career. A career is very similar to a job, but at least it comes with additional benefits like increased pay, healthcare, and ideally an upward path. Most people are apathetic toward a career. It doesn't really make them happier or sadder, it's just what they do with their day. If you want to love what you do, you need to find a calling. This is something people feel they were meant to do. It is their ikigai, and unsurprisingly, those people are the ones who have the highest work satisfaction. Now, you might think that many dream jobs include something like being a famous actor, singer, or athlete, but it turns out most dream jobs are more realistic, like being a teacher or a doctor. Unfortunately, a lot of people are giving up on pursuing their dream jobs in the pursuit of something that they think will bring them even more happiness: money. And to be fair, they're not entirely wrong. Which brings up the question, does money buy happiness? Yes. Yes, it does. I mean, we've all heard the phrase, money can't buy happiness, but that's something rich people like to say that no one else believes. A better saying would probably be that money can buy some happiness, but being poor will cost you a lot of it. And that's because there is a huge happiness gap between the poor and the middle class, but hardly any happiness gap between the middle class and the upper class. At a certain point, money stops making you happy and can actually be a bit of a hindrance. Or to quote the notorious B.I.G., mo money, mo problems. A 2010 Princeton study found that on a national average in the United States, money stops making you happy at around $74,000 a year, or $90,000 a year adjusted for inflation. Given that the average person in the US makes about $60,000 a year, I would say that giving you money will probably put a smile on your face. But while a job that makes more money will improve your mood a little bit, it's not going to help you a lot if that job is far away, because a long commute will hurt any happiness gains that could bring. So how does your daily commute affect your happiness? At least one study has found a direct correlation between your daily commute and your overall life satisfaction. With the longer the commute, the less happy you are. And that's bad news for Americans because we love to commute. I mean, no one loves to commute, but we do it anyway. The average American commutes 50 minutes to and from work every single day. And in New York City, it's even worse, with an average commute time of 80 minutes a day. Not surprisingly, New York City is also the least happy city in the United States. Hence why their t-shirts say, "I heart New York," and not "I smiley face New York." A 2012 study found that the longer people commute, the more likely they are to be overweight and have high blood pressure. Separate studies found that the long commuters spend less time with friends, family, and couples who commute more than 45 minutes are 40% more likely to get a divorce, which is one of the reasons why long family road trips are a terrible idea. A healthy work-life balance is important to your happiness, especially when you understand just how necessary relationships are to your happiness. Which is a great segue into our final broad topic: how do you choose relationships? Humans are very social creatures. We naturally form groups and then break off into smaller groups so that we can talk about members of the larger group behind their back. We have many kinds of relationships, not just with each other, but with large groups that share common interests, such as politics, sports, or religion. We even have relationships with non-human groups like pets and, more often, artificial intelligence. You might laugh, but there's a good chance somebody watching this has gotten into a Twitter war with a Russian bot. Oh no! While some of these relationships can be toxic, particularly those with the Russian bot, many are not just beneficial to our mental health, but vital. In the longest study ever on health and happiness, a Harvard University found that the single greatest factor contributing to a healthy, happy life isn't your genetics or your success, but rather the forming of strong, long-term relationships. And this shouldn't be a surprise. No man is an island. Even Tom Hanks needed Wilson. And the reason for this, again, goes back to evolution. Humans are very successful creatures, but we only really survive as a group. That's because a group of cavemen could work together to take down a woolly mammoth, but a single caveman by himself would probably end up as toe jam under the mammoth's foot. Now, you might think this kind of cooperation isn't really necessary in a modern world. After all, it's not like we go on a lot of mammoth hunts. But the truth is, we are still working with a hunter-gatherer brain, and that not only requires us to have friendships, but also limits how many we can have. So what is my friendship limit? Think about how many people you know. I'm not talking about celebrities or famous people, but how many people you have an actual relationship with. If I give you enough time, you would probably come up with a list of about 150 people. And that's because that is the average number of relationships that our brains can keep track of. Social media relationships don't really count. Sorry to burst the bubble of anyone who has a big Twitter following. Of those 150 people, about 5 are people whom you are intimately close with. Another 10 or 15 are close friends, another 50 are casual friends, and the rest would fall into the range of acquaintances. Essentially, that is our brain's weight limit when it comes to caring about other people. Positive psychologists say the inner 20% of that circle is responsible for about 80% of your relationship value, aka happiness. Now, those relationships might vary from person to person, but your typical person will have 2 childhood friends, 2 vital adult friends, 2 mentors in the form of a senior family member or an advisor, and at least 2 romantic relationships that stand out above the rest. Just don't tell your spouse about the other one. We also have at least 1 family member who we value above all others. So yes, your parents did have a favorite child, and no, it probably wasn't you. But among all those relationships, perhaps the most important is the one that a lot of people are failing at. The one they have with their spouse. Is wedded bliss a real thing? One of the best indicators if someone is happy or not is whether or not they are currently married, provided, of course, that it is a good marriage. After all, if you know anyone who's gone through a divorce, you know the months leading up to and following that divorce are not a very happy time. There's a lot of wiggle room when it comes to defining a good marriage, but for simplicity's sake, let's just say it's any relationship that brings you more happiness than stress, more security than worry, and more trust than jealousy. As long as you have that, your marriage can take whatever form with whoever or however many people you want, and it will probably do your mental health some good. Specifically, married people rate their life satisfaction 10% higher than single people and are also twice as likely to describe themselves as very happy. Now, if you're not married yet, don't worry, there's a good chance you will be. About 90% of the population will be married at some point in their life, although currently only about 50% of people are. And the reason for that is a lot of people haven't gotten married yet, some people have gotten married and their spouse died, and a lot of people just break up. Now, you've probably heard that about half of marriages end in divorce, but that statistic is a little misleading, as 70% of people will never get a divorce. The only reason the divorce rate is so high is because people who do get divorced, on average, will get divorced 3 or more times in their life. Wow. Yeah, so it's not that marriage is a failed institution, it's just that some people are really bad at it, and they're messing up the curve. And by the way, I'm not saying that if you've been divorced that means you're a bad person, but if you're one of those people who's been divorced 3 or 4 or 5 times, maybe it's you. Hey! Yeah, statistically speaking, you might be the problem, in which case consider giving it up before you ruin it for anyone else. Not surprisingly, divorce sucks when it comes to your happiness. Economists have even estimated that going through a divorce hurts your happiness the same as getting a $66,000 pay cut, which is especially true if you have to pay alimony in excess of that amount. However, it's still worth it, as a successful marriage brings you the happiness equivalent of $100,000. That being said, even happily married couples will tell you that not every year is worth $100,000. Personally, my wife and I have quite a few $100,000 years, but we've also gone through a couple of years that are more close to $100. Thankfully, that's normal for most long-term married couples. A lot of people see a happiness dip after the initial honeymoon phase. That's because in the first 2 years of your relationship, you're essentially riding a hormonal high of serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline. That translates to that cute puppy love, not to mention an active sex life. As that hormone fades, a lot of people see a dip in happiness, but couples who stick it out often see their happiness return to those honeymoon levels, although to be fair, the sex life never quite gets the same. So how much sex do I need to be happy? Personally, I think the answer is always more, but that's just me. Actually, according to one study, if you increase your sex from once a month to once a week, it will bring you the same happiness benefit as $50,000. So from a happiness perspective, a prostitute would seem like a pretty good investment. Yeah. Unfortunately, it turns out that people who cheat on their spouse tend to be a lot less happy than others, especially after the affair is discovered. Oops. At least one study found the happiness benefits of sex top out at about once a week, which is average for most couples under the age of 40. After the age of 40, a lot of people see their sex lives slow down, but that doesn't necessarily impact a couple's happiness levels. What does impact a couple's happiness, and sometimes hurts it, is what comes after sex. And by that, I mean children. Do children bring happiness? Some people think that having children will make them happy. Mostly people who have never had children. I have 2 kids, and I will tell you right now, I love them very much, but I don't always like them. For that matter, any parent who tells you they never have a problem with their kid must be a deadbeat dad who never sees their kids. Hey! Don't get me wrong, children are a blessing, but they are also a bit of a curse. Yes, they fill your life with a lot of joy, meaning, and happiness, but some days it feels like they are literally taking years off of your life. And for many people, it works out to a happiness loss. A study of 22 Western countries found that in all but 3, parents are less happy than their childless counterparts. That happiness gap is largest of all in the United States at 13%. Now, for any kids watching this, don't worry. It's not necessarily your fault that your parents are less happy. It's actually more of society. Western countries in particular don't offer a lot of support to parents in the form of paid sick leave, vacation days, or daycare. Ironically, that's why having more children can actually be less stressful than just 1 or 2, as older children can help raise younger children and also give them someone to play with. At least one study found that families maximize their happiness at a total of 4 kids, although personally that sounds like a lot to me, and I'm going to stick with just my 2. On that note, if you're on the fence about having kids, you might be interested to know that you can get more happiness bang for your buck, if you will, if instead of having a kid, you just have a pet. So do pets really bring happiness? Pets do make people happier than children, but that's mostly because pets are easier to manage. After all, when you go to work, you can't leave your child tied up in the backyard, not unless you want your neighbors to call the cops. When you're potty training a child, you can't grab their face and rub it in their diaper. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. In many ways, pets are actually an improvement over humans. For one thing, they know how to keep a secret. That's why my dog is the only one of my friends who I don't mind being in the bedroom when my wife and I are intimate. Pet owners spend billions of dollars on our animals every year, but we get a lot in exchange for that investment. Pet owners live considerably longer, healthier, and happier lives. They're more considerate, more compassionate, and they are more likely to have healthy relationships with other people. So which pet brings the most happiness? It's actually ferrets. Yeah. I'm kidding. Don't get a ferret. Ferrets are weird. Not surprisingly, dogs win this competition, hence why they are called man's best friend. I mean, we've been breeding them for so long, they're basically genetically designed to be our ideal companion. Sorry for any cat owners out there. I mean, I'm sure you love your cat, but they probably don't feel the same way about you. And that's not just my opinion. According to one study, playing with your dog will increase the dog's oxytocin levels by 57%, whereas cats only see an increase of about 12%. Now, you could make up the difference by getting a whole bunch of cats, but then you'd be one of those weird cat people. Finally, when it comes to relationships, we have to talk about the community relationships that we choose to form, such as a religious community. So what is the happiest religion? There have been many studies as to which religion will make you happiest, yet ironically, they all seem to contradict one another. Regardless, many religious people would say that your personal relationship with God is your only true path to happiness. Yet even that answer is open to interpretation. Religious people like to believe that their religion makes them happier. Non-religious people believe the opposite. Studies would suggest that both are true. Or to put it another way, being religious will make you happier, but being happier tends to make you less religious. And that's because religion offers communal support in times of crisis. Whenever there's a natural disaster or a catastrophe, church attendance goes up. But when things are going well, people tend to drift away from religion. This is one of the reasons why the happiest countries in the world are the least religious, and the saddest countries in the world are the most religious. That being said, religious people tend to be less depressed and suicidal, don't abuse drugs as much, and they tend to have better sex lives, presumably because they don't feel ironic about calling out God's name in the bedroom. Psychologists also like to point out that religious people only are happier when they live in communities that are mostly religious themselves. That gives them a sense of belonging and purpose, whereas they can feel like outsiders if they're surrounded by a bunch of atheists or agnostics. The reverse is also true for atheists or agnostics living among religious people. It's the same way with politics. Liberals and conservatives are both happier when they live in a community that shares their belief. But which political party is happiest? Well, unlike religion, there is a clear answer, yet there is still also lots to debate. Let me start by saying that politics in general is terrible for your happiness. It didn't used to be this way. I mean, when I was a kid, my parents were from opposite political parties, but they still got along. That being said, they also insisted in voting in every single election just so that the other one's vote would be canceled out. It was vindictive, yet also very patriotic. However, in the decades since then, political coverage on the news has become very divisive, and election cycles have gotten longer and longer. This alone has been attributed as the primary reason why happiness in Western countries has been in recent decline. But when it comes to happiness, the clear winner is conservative. Ever since the 1970s, studies have routinely shown conservatives are much happier than their progressive counterparts. There are several reasons for this. Among them is that conservatives are more likely to have a happy lifestyle where they're married and religious. At the same time, their ideology gives them a buffer against negative feelings about certain social issues, such as economic inequality. Ironically, while conservatives might be happier, it might be in their best interest to vote against their ideology. That's because progressive countries tend to have happier populations, as progressive policies such as universal healthcare and welfare tend to raise the quality of life, although it does mean paying more money in taxes.
No.
Another weird thing about politics, the more you follow politics, the less happy you are, but the more you care about politics, the happier you are. People on political extremes are a lot happier than moderates. Even though they shout the loudest, having that extreme worldview apparently makes them happier because seeing things in black and white is easier than shades of gray. So being happy politically is very difficult. You have to be conservative but vote liberal, ignore politics yet be very passionate about it. Ultimately, no one's doing it right. And that's it. That's our show. I mean, I could go on about various nuances of happiness, but by now you get the general idea. A lot of your happiness is out of your control, but you can make yourself happier by being the best version of you that you can be. Be healthy, be friendly, be productive, and you'll be happier. Maybe. Truth is, I'm not sure I'm qualified to say. At the end of the day, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist. I'm just a happy guy who likes to talk about things that make people happy. I want you to know that I did a lot of research into everything that I showed you here today, but at the same time, I also took terrible notes, so some of it might be wrong. Ultimately, this was a passion project, something to keep me sane over the last year during COVID lockdown. I'm not sure if it makes you happier, but it's already done wonders for me. Thanks for watching.